Every empire speaks with certainty about the safety of its money. Every government says its promises will last forever, but history keeps proving them wrong. From Rome to France, from the American Confederacy to modern Lebanon, people have woken up to find their savings worthless, their wages unable to buy anything, and their future taken away by a system they thought was safe. Collapse is not rare, it is the rule. The real question is not whether financial systems can fail, but how you protect yourself when they do. The feeling that things will last forever is one of the most dangerous financial mistakes people make. We look at our bank accounts and our own currency and assume they are solid. But money is not a solid foundation. Money is trust, and trust can disappear overnight. That is why history is both harsh and useful. Every collapse leaves behind the same answer. What actually protected wealth, and what turned to dust overnight? Look closely, and you will see that the people who came through these disasters best were not the ones who trusted the system most. They were often the first ones to question it. To understand this, let us go to the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire that survived for roughly 1,000 years after Western Rome fell. At the heart of its economy was a gold coin called the solidus. It was so reliable that merchants across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia accepted it without question. For centuries, it was about as close as the medieval world came to a global reserve currency. You would think Byzantium had learned from Rome's earlier disaster. Roman emperors had repeatedly reduced the silver content of the denarius until it became little more than cheap metal with a thin silver coating. Yet centuries later, Byzantium made the same mistake with gold. They slowly lowered the purity of the solidus and mixed cheaper metals into it. At first, nobody noticed. Then trust started to crack. The coin that had supported Mediterranean trade became just another political promise. Debasement destroyed its credibility, and the Byzantine economy lost the stability it once had. Who made it through? Not the people who trusted government promises. Those who quietly held real gold or invested in land beyond imperial reach protected their wealth. Everyone else watched their money melt away. The first lesson is simple. Governments often cannot resist weakening their money. When they do, real value moves into assets they cannot simply copy. But not every collapse begins because rulers play with money. Sometimes a shock arrives from nowhere. In the middle of the 14th century, Europe faced one of the worst pandemics in its history, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1351, perhaps half of all Europeans died. Cities emptied, villages disappeared, and trade routes broke down. But the economic story of the plague is not just a story of disaster. When half the workforce disappears, workers become valuable. Survivors could ask for higher wages. Food and land, once scarce, became more abundant compared with the number of people. Families with cash, silver, goods, or simply the ability to work suddenly had bargaining power they had never imagined. Land that once cost a fortune could be bought far more cheaply. Houses stood empty and fields went unplowed. Survivors found themselves in a buyer's market. If that sounds uncomfortably familiar, it should. During COVID, we saw a modern version of it. Supply chains broke down, governments printed trillions to keep the system moving, and people with liquidity bought assets while those living paycheck to paycheck fell behind. In the United States, house prices rose and stock markets recovered quickly, while millions struggled to pay rent. The message is clear. Pandemics redistribute wealth. Black Death survivors used scarcity to move up socially. During COVID, people with money bought property, stocks, and businesses others could no longer afford to hold. It is not a pleasant lesson, but it is true. Crises reward people with reserves and punish people without them. Pandemics show how quickly an economy can turn upside down. The banking collapse in Renaissance Florence teaches another lesson. Institutions that look too big to fail can still fall like dominoes. In the 1340s, Florence was Europe's financial center. Powerful banking families such as the Bardi and Peruzzi lived there. Their banks lent money to kings, including England's King Edward III, who borrowed huge sums while fighting France. When Edward stopped paying, the banks collapsed. Depositors were ruined, trade froze, and Florence was thrown into chaos. Ordinary people who trusted the city's biggest banks learned that size is not safety and reputation is no guarantee. The lesson? Too big to fail is a story as old as finance. Institutions exist to make profits, not to guarantee your survival. When they fall, they can take your savings with them. The same lesson returns in every century, from Florence to Lehman Brothers in 2008 and Lebanese banks freezing accounts in 2019. The people who survive are the ones who understand that an institution's promise is only worth something for as long as it can keep that promise. The American Civil War is remembered for battles, politics, and the end of slavery. But behind it was a brutal money war that few people talk about today. Both the Union and the Confederacy learned that a war on that scale could not be financed without printing money. In the North, the government issued paper notes called greenbacks, backed not by gold, but by the promise of the United States. At first, it looked bold and patriotic, but the more greenbacks entered the economy, the less they could buy. Inflation ate away at their value, and confidence started to shake. The South was even worse. The Confederacy printed huge quantities of graybacks to find resources. By the end of the war, prices had risen by thousands of percent and wages bought almost nothing. Soldiers' pay could lose its value before they had a chance to spend it. Families carried bags of banknotes and still struggled to buy bread. By 1865, Confederate currency was not merely weak, it was dead. In a collapse like that, what mattered was not paper promises but tangible assets: land, food, gold, anything real. For ordinary Southern families, it was devastating. Lifetimes of savings became worthless. But people who had access to real goods could buy property and wealth for almost nothing. A country may have already lived through currency collapse. Protection does not come from trusting the paper in your wallet. It comes from holding value that the system cannot inflate away. France also shows that revolutions can destroy money faster than war. In the 1790s, revolutionaries overthrew the monarchy, seized church land, and issued a new paper currency called the assignat, supposedly backed by confiscated property. In theory, it was meant to stabilize the economy. In practice, the government printed it again and again. Each new issue diluted the previous one. Prices exploded, wages could not keep up, and the assignat soon became worthless. Farmers did not want to sell food for paper. They wanted goods or silver. Bread riots returned to Paris, and the revolution began to consume itself. The winners were not the people holding patriotic paper. They were the people with food, gold, or property, things the government could not print. For ordinary Parisians, the lesson came too late. Promises, no matter how noble they sound, are only worth what others are willing to accept. When trust breaks, savings do not just shrink, they can disappear fast. 2 centuries later, the same lesson returned in Asia. In 1997, a speculative attack on the Thai baht turned into a regional crisis. Thailand had borrowed heavily in dollars, believing its exchange rate peg would hold. When the baht fell, foreign currency debt became impossible to repay overnight. Investors left. Currencies across Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and South Korea collapsed in a chain reaction. Economies shrank, unemployment rose, and governments asked the IMF for help. The people who paid the highest price were not the global funds that started the panic. They were ordinary citizens whose savings lost value, whose mortgage payments doubled, and whose jobs disappeared. Again, the pattern was familiar. People with dollars or assets abroad held up better than those who trusted local currency alone. Countries dependent on foreign debt were forced into austerity, while some Wall Street institutions bought Asian assets at fire sale prices. What looked local was actually a global transfer of wealth. From Byzantium to Argentina, the same warning appears: debt in somebody else's currency can be a deadly trap. When the storm comes, it is not the lender who drowns, it is the borrower. By now, the pattern should be clear. In revolutionary France, Civil War America, and modern Asia, the same things keep happening. Paper money collapses. Debt chains countries and families. The people who make it through are not the ones who trust the system most. They are the ones who see its weakness before it breaks. The most unsettling part is that collapse is not just ancient history. It is happening now. In Lebanon between 2019 and 2021, banks did something that still seems unthinkable to many people in developed countries. They effectively shut the doors. People woke up to frozen accounts, limited withdrawals, and a collapsing currency. The Lebanese pound lost more than 90% of its value. A lifetime of savings became pocket change. People stood outside banks begging for access to their own money, only to be told it was gone. This was not just a problem for small savers. Middle-class families, retirees, doctors, engineers, anyone who trusted the system was hit hard. The lesson was brutal. Money in the bank is not a treasure chest. It is a loan you made to an institution, and in a crisis that institution may not be able or willing to pay you back. The people who held up best had diversified abroad, held real assets such as gold or property, or kept some cash outside the banking system. Everyone else was trapped inside. Do not think this is far away. In 2008, Americans watched homes get repossessed and retirement savings shrink, while some banks that helped cause the crisis were rescued. In 2020, trillions were printed to keep the system alive. It was a lifeline, but it also lifted asset prices for people who already owned assets, while ordinary wages did not rise at the same pace. In 2023, regional banks in the United States collapsed almost overnight after depositors lost confidence. It was another reminder that too big to fail is often just a comforting story we tell ourselves until the door closes in our face. So how do you protect yourself when everything starts falling apart? History does not give one single answer. In Byzantium, it was gold. After the Black Death, it was having enough liquidity to buy abandoned land. In Florence, it was not blindly trusting giant banks. In the Confederacy, it was hard goods. In France, it was food and property. In Asia, it was avoiding debt in someone else's currency. In Lebanon, it was getting out before the banks shut their doors. The details change, but the theme stays the same. Survival does not come from blind trust in paper or institutions. It comes from understanding what holds real value when illusions collapse. And here is the part that should wake you up. Collapse is both a tragedy and an opportunity. For people who are unprepared, it is ruin. For people with resilience, liquidity, or assets that cannot be printed away, it can be the moment to buy wealth at a fraction of its old price. After the Black Death, peasants became landowners because there was plenty of land and too few people to work it. After 2008, people with cash bought homes while millions faced foreclosure. History shows that protection is not only about defense. It is also about being in a position to take opportunities others are forced to give up under pressure. But wealth is not only what you own, it is also what you can do. The people who survived history were not just those with gold or land. They were people who could create value when others could not. The baker who could make bread, the craftsperson who could repair tools, the farmer who could feed a community, the merchant who could move goods across borders. They did not just survive collapses, they rose during them. In every crisis, money can lose meaning, but production does not. People still need food, homes, repairs, trade, and a life. Those who can meet those needs do not stay poor for long. That is the deeper protection, not blind faith in institutions or hope that governments and banks will save you, but real assets, real skills, and the awareness that every illusion can eventually collapse. Every crisis is a transfer, from the many who trusted to the few who prepared, from paper promises to tangible value, from passive savers to active builders. History has shown this again and again. So the question is not whether everything will fall apart. It does. The question is whether you will be left holding promises or holding something real. History does not repeat itself exactly, but ignore it and its consequences can still crush you. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe to the channel. History has answers. Together, we will learn where to look for them.